Well, we're continuing on with our class on integrity. Not a very common biblical word. We don't really hear it a lot, but it's a very important part of who we are, of the whole history, of what it can do in our lives, through our lives, and in the lives of others. And again, this series that I'm doing here is by actually Andy Stanley, one of his sermon series. I'm just borrowing it and modifying it into a class series. So it's been quite interesting. So I'd like to start out with some quotes. This is a quote here by Dwight D. Eisenhower. The supreme quality for leadership is unquestionably integrity. Without it, no real success is possible, no matter whether it is on a section gang, a football field, in an army, or in an office. Hold it, you know what? I think this is last week's slides. This is. I'm trying to think. I thought I did that one last week too. So as he's finding that, I'll go ahead and read the quotes off of my notes. I'm hoping I sent the right one. It was 6. Okay. My quote for today, Nelson Mandela. As I have said, the first thing is to be honest with yourself. You can never have an impact on society if you have not changed yourself. Great peacemakers are all people of integrity, of honesty, and humility. I had a second one as well. This is from Stephen Covey. We all know who Stephen Covey is, maybe. He's actually from Utah. Moral authority comes from following universal and timeless principles like honesty, integrity, and treating people with respect. And lastly, I have one by W. Clement Stone. Anybody know who he was? W. Clement Stone. Oh, it's up there now. All right, perfect. Have the courage to say no. Have the courage to face the truth. Do the right thing because it's right. These are all the magic keys to living your life with integrity. Does this kind of sound like what we've been talking about the past 5-6 weeks, those of you that have been through here? You know, this is just, it's amazing that, you know, we can see it in the Bible, but we can see it also in regular life. This gentleman was a author for self-help books. He was a philanthropist, an American businessman. I wasn't really sure who he was, but anyway, I'm sure we all remember a time, it wasn't really too long ago, that if you wanted to find out some history or find out something on someone, you know, maybe some dirt, what would you do? How would you find out? Let's say you were going to go work for someone or you're going to hire someone and you wanted to get a little bit of history. What was but before the internet, what would we do? Talk to someone who knows them. Yeah, you try to say, references. Remember, like, we used to give references on there, give a reference. So you try to talk to someone, but that was probably someone who was going to give them a good reference, right? I mean, something we always want to have, good references. Any other ideas of how in the world did we find out something about someone? Former bosses. That probably would give you a little bit. Yeah, you hopefully, you want a good reference. You want a good reference. And where I'm kind of leading here today is, in today's society, the advent of the internet, you can find out just about anything you want about someone. And especially, let's say you're a politician or a person out in the public. And really what people are after now, what are they after? Dirt, right? We just want to find something bad about someone, any writer that wants to say, well, again, I'm looking for something that I can, be derogatory against this person. You can find it. There's just, there's nothing out there nowadays that is, I would hate to be a politician or even a star or something because, people are just constantly trying to find something wrong, something bad. It's amazing, you never see the ones saying, trying to find something good about somebody. You just want them, they're trying to find, well, this guy did this, and he was late with his library book. Back 30 years ago, we found out about it. We did a search, and he didn't return his library book. He probably still has it. The odd thing is, people are always looking for a little bit of bad against someone. Isn't that strange? In fact, I like this because it's such a fact. A little bit of bad can cancel out a whole lot of good, right? And that's what we kind of see people. We see these people trying to find a little bit of bad so they can say, well, I don't care what the guy's doing, well, how much good he's done. They don't even want to bring that up. They just want to say he did this one little thing, and it cancels out all the bad. Does it work the other way? It really doesn't. Does it? Take someone that's getting out of prison. You know, if they was to say, well, look, they did this, you know, they helped this person or they did this in prison. Well, gosh, that should cancel out all of that bad they did. But it doesn't, does it? Isn't it odd how we can just use a little bit of bad and it can make us look like, forget it. In fact, it's something that we have to deal with nowadays. And we all are familiar with this term, right? Cancel culture. That's the big thing now, right? Does anybody actually know what this means? Or is there really a definition of it? Here's the best definition that I found, at least. Cancel culture refers to the mass withdrawal of support from public figures or celebrities who have done things that aren't socially acceptable today. These practices of canceling or mass shaming often occurs on social media platforms such as Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. Does that maybe fit what we kind of think about cancel culture? Well, the story we're going to look at today shows that cancel culture was going on way back in the time of Daniel, which is who we started with last week, and I said we're going to continue on. But let's just do a quick reminder that we've been looking at in the past 5 weeks, before we kind of get into that. You know, if you recall, we can easily say that the definition of integrity is doing what we ought to, even if it costs us. Doing what we ought to, even if we cost us. We've been talking about this the past 5 weeks. Because as we discussed in the very first class, if we lack integrity and we don't do what we ought to, it always costs someone. Someone probably close to us. The stress and the tension and the aftermath or a breach of our integrity always gets transferred, just like we said in the buildings. When you have a lack of structural integrity, the same with our personal integrity. It always gets transferred to other people. It just doesn't disappear. Or another way of putting it is that a personal lack of integrity always impacts other people. Always impacts other people. And let's also keep in mind the one key verse that we've been kind of going through the past little while here too. And it resonates throughout the whole entire lesson that we've been talking about that Andy actually does. And that's in Proverbs 11:3. Remember the integrity. In fact, Andy likes to do this. He'll say, sit up. Everybody sit up straight. You know, make sure you're straight. You sit in your chair. Just like we talked about when you get ready to take a test in school, what the teacher always tell you, sit up, get ready, get your both elbows on the thing so that you can be focused, so you can know what you're doing. The integrity and the moral courage of the upright will guide them. Again, looking straight, looking in the distance, looking in the future. But the crookedness or the bent overness of someone that's looking at the now, the treacherous will destroy them. Always keep that in mind. So today we're going to look at one of the most famous stories in the Bible. We're all familiar with this story. You know, we may have been taught it when we were in Sunday school. We may have taught it to kids when we were teaching in Sunday school. And I think even if you didn't go to Sunday school, somewhere you've heard of this story, right? And the story, of course, is Daniel in the lion's den, right? A great kid story because there's so much that we can use. You know, great flannel pieces you can put up, and there's just a bunch of them to pick from too. There's not just usually one like, oh, you can pick from this one. You can and just some good things that you can do and really keep the kids involved. But this famous story about Daniel, if you remember last week when I asked at the very end how old Daniel was when we came to the very end there, but this story basically came about 55 years after the story we discussed last week. 55 years old, so he would have been about 70 years old when he's in this position here, going into the dead land. You know, a lot of times I didn't realize that. It seems like the flannels are always he's in his 30s or something. You know, he's just a young guy, 27 at least. But no, he was actually 70 years old. So remember as well, excuse me, let me take a little sip here. We're also live, right? I want to welcome everyone online as well. Sorry about that, those of you who are online. So remember, Daniel had served under and was the primary dream interpreter of Nebuchadnezzar and also his chief until he was gone through all of Nebuchadnezzar. Then he served under Belshazzar, which is his son most likely, or a relative. He's gone, right? And now we see a new king that's coming into play, a Persian king, King Darius. The Babylonians, again, are no longer the big fish in town. The Persians have taken over. And Daniel will also be in a very comfortable and prestigious spot of power with Darius. So I'm going to start reading, and actually in Daniel 1:6. It's not all going to be on the board. If you want to turn there, you can. I don't know what version you have. Andy goes back and forth between a couple different versions. I'm going to try this be mostly NIV, but you can get the point when we're there. But so if we start reading in Daniel 6:1, in fact, actually, now that I was going to have my phone out here, threw me a curve. Read Daniel 6:1. So, Steve, do you have it?
Yeah.
Read 6:1 and 2.
It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable them so that the king might not suffer loss.
Okay, so again, King Darius comes into play. He decides he's going to make 120 satraps, which would be like governors or leaders, basically, throughout the kingdom. And then he's going to have 3 administrators over those 120 people. And one of them, it says, is going to be Daniel. So obviously, Daniel was in a very good position, wasn't he? Very good position. And again, the satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer any loss. So he was really worried. He wanted to make sure that things were taken care of, that things were followed properly. 120 people that's quite a few leaders as well. He's making sure that everything's running smooth. Now we pick up in 3. It says, now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the governors by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. So, wow. He said there was going to be 3, and what he's going to have Daniel over all of those, everyone. He was going to have those other 2 report to him. He was going to be the big cheese. And why does it say it? He was so distinguished. He distinguished himself among administrators and the governors with his exceptional qualities. What do you think one of the qualities was that he had? Integrity. He was a true man of integrity, right? And in 4, we see then the other 2, the other commissioners and the governors began trying to find a reason to bring a complaint against Daniel concerning the administration of the kingdom. Well, hey, why in the world would they do that? It's lonely at the top, right? They were jealous, right? Yeah. How in the world did he get to this position, This guy's not even from here, It took us years to do this as well, and we've had to bribe everyone. And we've been, again, it just doesn't make any sense. Remember, Daniel had been in this position in power and government for over 55 years, right? Certainly, as I said, when they're going to find a reason or complain against Daniel, certainly they're going to be able to find some skeletons in his closet or something that they can, use against him, right? Certainly. 55 years. How in the world could someone do something in 55 years, especially in government, and not have had some bribes or paid or something? Right? Do you think it's possible? In our day and age? Okay, it is possible. Practical? Probable? It's yeah, exactly. They wouldn't be reelected, exactly. So in 4 it says, but they could find no reason for any accusations or evidence of corruption, because he was a faithful, a man of high moral character and personal integrity. Leanne? No, this thing's going off again, and I think they're supposed to be. It's about the same time as it was last time when our alarm went off. Now, the reason why they couldn't find anything against him, one of the main points is because even though he's 70, he made up his mind back when he was 17, right, to be a man of integrity. This isn't something he's just all of a sudden go, well, now I better go ahead and do this. I've learned my lesson. No, this goes all the way back when he was 17, when we talked about in the story last week, how he was a man of integrity. And finally, after these most likely corrupt government officials looked, and they didn't find, they did their best, what they could call, at the time, let's call it an inter-scroll search, not an internet search, because they probably had to look through a bunch of scrolls or whatever, because that's all that they had back then. That was their they did their best to try to do a cancel culture on Daniel, but they couldn't do it, could they? Couldn't find anything, And it said in 6:5, and no negligence or corruption of any kind was found in him. Then these men said, well, we'll not find any basis for accusation against Daniel unless we find something against him in connection with the law of his God. Again, they knew Daniel. They've seen him operate. They knew what he did. They knew how he stood. Thank you. They knew what he was for. But they said, we got to go find something that maybe we can find with his God. There's got to be something out there, right? Got to be something out there. Well, then these commissioners and governors, they agreed to approach the king, and they said to him, this is in 6, if you follow along in 6. O King Darius, live forever. It just shows how these guys also, they really, they were at his, they were, whatever we knew. O King Darius, live forever. All the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects and the administrators and the counselors and the governors have consulted and agreed together that the king should establish a royal statute and enforce an injunction that anyone who petitions or prays to any god besides you, O King Darius, live forever, O king, during the next 30 days shall be thrown into a den of lions. Again, these guys knew Daniel. They knew what he did, right? They knew who he prayed to. They knew he prayed to his God. And so did Darius. Darius knew this as well. But, it's odd because, when people start coming to you and say, oh, we got an idea for you. Tell you what, this is a great little, it's going to lift you up. We're going to have parties. We're going to have, Andy Stanley, we're going to have bobblehead, people. We're going to have everything out here. And it's just going to be a 30-day Darius, live for Darius, oh, great God time. Oh, yeah, this sounds like a pretty good deal. He's kind of not even thinking about Daniel at this point, because most likely he's thinking, well, Daniel must be in on this because, he's one of my things. They sent him somewhere else. Said, Daniel, why don't you go check this out? And then they all came here. They all met together. And then they decided to go see the king. Well, question, why do you think they did this?
They knew the outcome.
Yeah. Well, I guess they were hoping for that, right? They were pretty. I guess they were pretty sure. Yeah. 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 So.
It would work. I mean, it wasn't like they guessed or, well, let's try this and see. But, I mean, even before they come up with the plan, they say, the only way we're ever going to trip this guy up is something in connection with the law of his God. And so they knew that they knew who Daniel was. The reputation that he had built up over a lifetime was the only thing that they needed to convince themselves that this was going to be the thing, Daniel's downfall.
Yeah. So it was they couldn't find any dirt on him. No way could they do that. But they went to the thing they knew was the best thing that he had, and they wanted to try to twist that. Well, we're going to have to go to, we know what he does good. I mean, everything he does is good. Even him praying to his God is probably good. But we have to use this. We have to find some way of using this against him. And of course they could because they knew how good he was, right? And the other thing that Andy makes sure he pointed out, he says, they knew that Daniel would not pray to Darius, right? Even though he respected Darius, and we'll see that a little bit farther on here, he respected Darius, and he was only put in this position to Darius because Darius also trusted and respected him. So, he really did like Darius. He really thought he could, he was doing as best he could for him as well. He had nothing against him at all. But it went against what he had already made up his mind to do, what we talked about last week, right? He made up his mind. He made up his mind when he was 17. Mike.
One of the things that Darius probably, I'm sure that Darius depended upon Daniel's integrity to tell him exactly the way things were. He didn't, like these other satraps came to him and gave him all this praise and, hollow, superficial glory.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel wouldn't do that. And so the thing that they knew that Daniel would do, that his personality, his reputation, his integrity would direct him to do, because it always had, made him totally transparent. There was no guile, no sense of another agenda. Whether he liked Darius or not, he was the perfect employee.
Yeah.
Because he was honest and he was forthright and he was consistent.
Exactly. So we see in Daniel 6, 8, and 9, now, O king, establish this injunction and sign this document. So really, they didn't want him to just say, does this sound like a good idea? Yeah, it sounds like a great idea. Let's go ahead and do it. Because just, in the legal realm of it, he could have said, well, hold it. I didn't sign anything. Wait, now that this is happening, I'm going to, but no, they want to cover all their bases. So they said, sign this document so that it may never be changed. It can't be changed in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persian, which ensured that it may not be altered or revoked, even by you. So King Darius put the decree in writing. Okay, sounds good. Even though he was the top dog, there was still, just like even with our president, you still have to go through Congress. She'll have to do this. You have to make sure. So even though they wanted to cover every base to make sure that he couldn't come back and change this. Now, when Daniel learned of this, when he got back from the trip they sent him on, when Daniel learned this, of the decree and put it into published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem, and what did he do? What would you do? I know. You probably wouldn't have opened those windows, right? Really, let's be honest. What would we do? Wouldn't we go up there and go, let's see, it's only 30 days, I can probably go along with this for 30 days. I just don't really want to cause a problem. Steve.
Just a few years ago, I was in China, and I went to worship at an underground church, and I had sent some texts back and forth with a young Chinese man that I knew, who was helping me to find the location and the place where I could go, and which it's not legal to do. And so all these texts are going back and forth across, anybody could, I guess, no, I couldn't, I can't even barely figure out how to text, but somebody could capture them and find out what so as I'm on the taxi, on the way there, I'm thinking to myself, if a policeman stops me right now and says, where you're on your way to, what was I going to tell him?
There we go.
And I was trying to think of a better answer or a different answer than I'm going to worship.
Right. So this just begs the question for us. We'll see what Daniel, but what would we do? And just like Steve said, really, if we're being honest, wouldn't we try to find another way? We've talked about doing what we ought to do, and that's you knew what you ought to do. And that's it might have cost you. You don't know. We talk about what we ought to do if it might cost us, but in this case, Daniel's read the decree. He knows everything. What do you do if you know for sure it's going to cost you? He knew what the consequences was. He'd read them, right? So it really depends on this. It depends on what's the most important thing to you at that time. Because like Steve explained, it depends on what's going through your mind. It depends on what's most important to you at that time. Now, we know what was most important to Daniel when he was 17 or when he was 70. But how about us? Do we tend to be, and this is just your own personal question, I'm not looking for an answer, but Roger?
It doesn't have to be an enemy. Example is when you're on vacation with the family 2 or 3 weeks, do you go to church on Sunday morning? Go to worship? Because people are watching. They're not your enemies.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. So really it depends on us. It depends on what's the most important thing to you. And just like what I think Andy's trying to get the point across here, and I think Daniel's trying to get the point across, is we need to make up our mind. We need to make up our mind and stick to that. We need to make up our mind, and that's it, which is what Daniel did when he was 17. He made up his mind. We need to make up, we should have all have our mind already made up on what we would do. Not based on a circumstance, but on what we should do. So let's see. Now Daniel, when he learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and he prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. No change, no nothing. Why? Why did Daniel do this? Because this is a good point that Andy brought out. He truly understands what and who determines outcomes. He truly understands who determines outcomes. It wasn't Nebuchadnezzar, was it? Right? He thought he did, but now he's dead and his empire's gone. And now Darius, his new boss, is pretty sure he determines outcomes, but there'll be a time when he's dead and gone. So keep that in mind. 6:11 through 12. Well, of course, Daniel's up there, got his windows open, just like clockwork. They've got his spies out there watching. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. Now that's an interesting point right there. Asking God for help. I don't think he's just praying his normal prayer that he's been praying. He knows the situation that he's in. And he's asking God for help. Do you think he's asking him to intervene? Could be. We don't know. If you're asking God for help, you're saying, help me find a way to, I've already made my mind, I'm doing this is the way you asked me, but he's asking God for help. A lot of times, when I've read that, I kind of missed that, but he's up there praying, not just doing his normal prayer, but he's asking God for help. So they went to the king, and they spoke to him about his royal decree. Aha! Did you not publish a decree that, during the next 30 days, anyone who prayed to any god or human being except you, your majesty, O Darius, great, would be thrown into the lion's den? Then the king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. Now, how do you think the king felt at that time? I think he's going, oh man, I didn't think of this. What? Yeah, I wouldn't think that that Daniel wasn't part of this. Oh, he's one of my best governors, Unbelievable, isn't it? Then in 13, do I have 13? No, I'm reading it out of here. Then in 13 it says, then they said to the king, Daniel, who is the one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you. Now they're trying to bring a little bit more, hey, look, we're just trying to show you exactly what the problem is here. He pays no attention to you, your majesty. He didn't even listen to your decree. He obviously doesn't like you. It's, we do, but obviously he doesn't. Because if he did, he still prays 3 times a day. We caught him. When the king heard this, of course, he was greatly distressed. And you wonder how he was distressed. He was distressed that they caught him, or that they're saying these bad things about him, or about Daniel praying 3 times. And I think we'll get an answer to that just a little bit later. So he was determined, what does it say here? He's greatly distressed, and he was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him, because I guess he had till the end of the day to actually save him. Steve, did you have a comment?
I don't know that it's important, but I think it's kind of interesting in verse 13. It says they identified Daniel as one of the captives from Judah, or in the NIV as one of the exiles from Judah, and that was a long time ago. I mean, according to what you've taught us today,
right,
is that he was 70 years old,
55 years ago. Yeah, 50 years
so
ago.
this has been, decades and decades and decades. But basically, they're saying, he's not one of us.
Right.
They're pointing that out and making it pretty clear.
Well, again, that's something that we do even today. It's amazing how that sort of thing happens. That we try to find whatever we can, whatever dirt you can. His grandfather's uncle's brother's sister did this. Whatever. We try to find whatever we can. But true, they bring that up because they want to try to make Darius aware, even though I'm sure he was of what's going. But he's trying to, well, yeah, but did you really know about this? Well, so we can go, I don't know. But we see, he says, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel. I don't want this to happen to Daniel. He's one of my best guys, He did everything he could in his power to save Daniel. Then in 15 it says, then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, remember, your majesty, O great King Darius, that according to the new law in the Medes and the Persians, no decree or edict the king issued can be changed. It doesn't matter what you do. We're just reminding you. You probably know this, but we're just reminding you can't change this. You can try whatever you want, but just oh great King Darius, it can't be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and they threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve, continually rescue you." It's quite interesting because Andy kind of used. He says, this lion's den. How many here have ever seen the lion's den? How about you go to the zoo? You look in the zoo. Our son, he worked at the zoo for a few years as a helper or whatever, and he'd come home and tell us stories and so forth about it. But those lions aren't very clean. They're not clean animals. When they chew up there's a mess. They get in there with this big hose, and they have to hose out. It's just so the people have room. But we're talking a lion's den. This thing. What are they feeding the lion? Probably I don't know, animals or deer or people or whatever. This place was a mess. They didn't get down, and they said it was probably down in a hole. It wasn't some, with bars on, like we go to the zoo, we think, oh, lion's den. No, this isn't a lion's den. It's not like the comedies we see, where it's a nice little thing. This place was a terrible place that if you used to even think about even putting your head over and smelling it, it probably would have made you throw up, okay? But they lowered him down. They said they probably lowered him down into it. And then the king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve, continually rescue you." So even Darius, at this point, he's done everything he can do, and he's even telling him, look, may your God, that I know you serve, and that you pray to 3 times a day, I'm glad you do, may he even rescue you. He's even knowing this. So in 17 it says, a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles. Again, he really followed the rule of law here, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then in 18, then the king returned to his palace, and he spent the night without eating and without entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. How distraught was Darius that this was going to happen. Did Darius know the outcome? Did he assume he knew the outcome? Right? Hey, look, it's happened every time. It's never, it's impossible. I've seen it happen. You can do it, say what you want, but I've seen it happen. It's impossible. When you throw up someone in a lion's den, that it's impossible. He knew the outcome. And he was so distraught over it, he couldn't even sleep. And then at the first light of dawn, the king got up and he hurried to the lion's den. And when he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguishing voice. Now, we all know the rest of the story, right? Do we have to say anything? Right? But if we continue to the end, we really miss the point of the story. The point of the story is not what happens next. The point of the story has already happened. Now, when we're teaching the kids, it's, that's going to go over their head. They go, what? What are you talking about? We'd never stop here and say, okay, kids, the point of the story's already happened. Let's get out our things and start writing. No, we continue to the end because the kids need to know that. But you know what? We as adults need to understand that the point of the story's already happened. Because Daniel's primary concern was not the outcome of his decision, was it? Let's face it, if Daniel's concern was the outcome of his decision, I think like me, he probably would have made a different decision. Like I said earlier, 30 days, yeah, I can find something else to do. No problem. I can do that. That's what we do, right? We try to justify, we try to come up with different ways, But that wasn't his primary concern. His primary concern was doing the right thing no matter what it cost. If the story ended right here, Daniel won. He won because he did the right thing no matter what it cost. And again, just like we said last week, there was no guarantee for Daniel, was there? I don't think that, again, no angel came to him and said, don't go ahead and jump in and everything's going to be fine. We'll take care of you. We've seen this. We've seen that happen many a time, but not here. And again, just like I said, there's no guarantee for us when we find ourselves in tough situations out there, is there?
I think it's interesting that when Darius realized what he had done, he didn't plead to his God. He pleaded to Daniel's God.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. He pleaded Daniel's God. May your God save you. Yeah. So remember, anything we gain by sacrificing our integrity either can, or let's face it, will be taken away someday. Anything that we sacrifice our integrity for. Yeah, but this was so good, I couldn't pass it up. Right? There's only one thing that we can't lose, and that's what you do. And that's what Daniel did. You can't lose what you do. No one can ever take that away from you. Even sometimes maybe we think we would, But Daniel won before he knew the outcome. Because he was good at knowing what we easily forget. How many of us think that we're good at controlling outcomes? Or figuring out outcomes, we're not really good at even predicting outcomes, are we? Who's going to win the game today? Come on, someone's got to have the, We're not even good at predicting outcomes, are we? Yep. We think we are.
We have some influence.
Yeah.
You think, maybe if baseball players are notorious. I think if I turn my hat around backwards, then my team will start doing better, or we'll start doing this. And we think that somehow these things are going to have some impact.
Yeah.
I think if I watch my team and I can do this or I do that, or if I turn it off, they'll start doing better.
Isn't that the case? You wonder, just like today, people have a ritual that they're going to go through. If I sit in this armchair right here and I put my drink right here, because last year they won. So they're going to follow the same ritual that they did, and it's amazing that the billions and billions of people are going to be doing that sort of thing. I'm going to predict the outcome. Susan. Thanks, Ryan.
If we knew the outcome of when we pray, if we knew the outcome, there's no faith that's required. There's no, why
True,
even
yeah.
pray about? It takes faith to, pray about something and know that God has He loves you and He's going to take care of you no matter what, and whatever He does is going to be the right thing. But Daniel had that faith in God and that relationship with Him.
Yep.
If you think about it, in Acts chapter 7, Stephen is kind of the Daniel of the New Testament, but it has a completely different outcome. But they both made the same decision that they were going to do what they knew to do, and they didn't care about what the consequences were for doing the right thing.
Right.
And his consequences didn't work out like Daniel's.
Right.
But he made the.
He still won, though.
But but boy, it's
It's a big cost.
yeah. Yeah, his mom didn't think that was a
Right,
winning day.
right,
I mean,
right.
but it's tough.
Well, again, like I said, the one thing that maybe we think we have, the only thing that we maybe can control is ourselves. But, we even have a hard time at that, don't we? How many of us have said this? But you made me do this. So who's controlling you? I have, I can totally control myself. But, we question that even from time to time. Ooh, about 3 minutes here. I don't know if 2 minutes. I don't know if I'm going to have time. I really appreciate all your input and your comments too. Because Andy, at this point, maybe I'm going to save till next week here. Because Andy, he goes on and tells us the true story about his dad, Charles Stanley, which we've hopefully made that point. His dad is, and when his dad was younger, he had to make some decisions. Some decisions that the church leaders had come to him, and they were questioning him on this and that, and they wanted him to do some certain things, and he wasn't, it was going against his integrity. And he said they had meetings at home. His dad would come home, they'd sit around at the coffee table, and they'd explain some things. And of course, when he was young, he didn't know everything, but he says he knew everything that went on then. But he said, my dad finally made the right decision, and then he came up with this statement, and apparently. Charles Stanley uses this statement quite a bit, and even Andy uses this statement. I'll go ahead and just end with this statement. He said, my responsibility is to obey God and leave all the consequences to him. That's what Charles Stanley did. That's what Andy Stanley's telling us to do. I believe that that's what God wants us to do. My responsibility is to obey God and to leave all the consequences to him. He's big enough to handle them. That is for sure. So we're going to go ahead and close it out there, and I'll finish up because it's got some good stuff to finish out here next week. But let's go ahead and have a word of prayer. Most wonderful and gracious Father, we thank you for being so big that you can handle all our consequences. We thank you for loving us in so many ways, and in the example that we see here, that we need to put our trust in you and our faith in you in all that we do and all that we say. We know it's difficult, dear Father, and we thank you for your grace that helps us through all these difficult times. For without it, we know we'd be lost. We thank you for this day, for your goodness and your glory, and the time we'd be able to come here today and to worship and corporate worship and fellowship and enjoy the time that you've given us here today. And we just ask again, I truly ask that your Spirit lead us and guide us today. It's in Christ's name we do pray. Amen.